what has also happened now is you have many conflicting narratives, which is the
Hmm.
first time we've had this, right? Because previously it was whoever got their narrative out on the media, like had the control of it. Nobody's going to compete with Anderson or with Disney or whatever. But these
Right.
days, any two fools can hop onto YouTube and share their opinion with the world.
I have no idea what you're talking about. So to quote a great philosopher, stories are like onions. Go.
That's true. And in my point of view, stories effectively have six layers, right? So, and this goes actually back to mythology, which we can get into a little bit later. But let me just go through the kind of six layers that I see in any given piece of mythology. The outer layer is your plot. That's your events. It's what happens in the story. It is basically your package of delivery of the story. Then, one layer down, you have the characters and their relationship to each other. And in a myth, and even in a story that you tell to your readers, those relationships tell the reader what is acceptable and what is not acceptable within the society that these characters exist on. And it's part of your story, right? If there's like an illicit love story, then you show the legitimate relationships and you show the barriers breaking of that story. And then either it ends in tragedy if the illicit love is actually really bad, or it ends in happiness if they manage to change their society or whatever. So that's the kind of relationship layer. Then one layer down from the relationships, you have the societal relationships, what I call the politics, but in our pre-discussion, you were like, not politics. So I don't mean
Exactly
politics
what I
as
said. I
in,
said my eyes went numb when you said the word politics, whatever
so
that means.
So I don't mean politics in the sense of like, our democracies today or whatever. I mean politics in terms of who holds power within a society.
And how
Why
they
do they
relate to each
hold
other.
power? Yeah, and how they relate to each other, how
Yeah.
the hierarchy works and why. And and of course, like the events of the story can change that hierarchy or establish it or confirm it, etc.
Or vice versa.
Or vice
The
versa. Yeah.
society's relationships can change your story
Can
as it
change
goes
the
on.
events.
Hmm.
Yeah.
The plot.
So that's those three layers. Then once you go beyond that, once you go into the deeper inner core, the smaller part of the onion, you hit the emotional layer. These are the emotional events of the story, like the changes in emotion that the story shows, and the legitimate and illegitimate emotions. And what I mean by that is what does that society regard emotion, what do they regard as good emotions and what do they regard as bad emotions? And for which identities, because sometimes societies will delineate what emotions who can feel. Um, and then one layer down from that, you come to the symbolic layer. So this is things like, what does white mean in your, the color white in clothing mean in your story? What does the color red mean? What does the color purple mean, etc. Those kinds of symbolic elements and using them in the story to confirm, power and politics and cultural structure and so on. And then at the very innermost layer, the sixth layer, is the spiritual layer. What is the connection between humanity and the larger cosmos? What is the connection to the gods, to magic? How do they see that kind of magic? And if you look at mythologies, you can see those six layers very clearly come out because the purpose of myths is to communicate to people within a culture or society a set of values, right? And I mean, that was pretty much the purpose of these stories.
Right.
And and the plot events is what makes it exciting. It's what makes it memorable. But the rest of the story, the rest of the layers is what communicates to the audience that this is why you should listen to your elders, listen to the the king, the grand high poobah or whatever. This is how why magic is bad and why you should, you know, kick witches out of your community or whatever the case may be. So they
I think
exist
there's a
on all of those
little. I
layers.
think it goes a little deeper than that because those seem to be more metaphorical, more of a, this is why greed is bad, or this is why, striving for power is bad, or whatever.
Hmm.
Because
Yeah,
magic and witches and kings and all of that in stories really represent. It's not like we're saying, oh, here's a story that you read and you should go kill all kings. It's a, usually centered around power or abuse or, you know,
sure,
tyranny or something like that.
sure, but I'll give you an example, and I'll give you an example actually from Tolkien's writing. Tolkien was a monarchist. I don't
Mm-hmm.
know if you know that about him.
Mm-hmm.
He firmly actually believed that, you know, kings should be involved
Mm-hmm.
in governments and so on. I'm not quite sure how far that monarchical, you know, how far that monarchical bent went. But if you look at Lord of the Rings, when the one true king sat his Viggo Mortensen handsome looking ass down on the throne, all was right with the land. Right? There's a very clear symbolism line there between like this is the correct way.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not like, you know, I'm not throwing stones at him or anything. I'm just saying, like, you can see that kind of symbology in a
Yeah.
lot of myths. You know, when you replace the bad king with a good king, it's all golden.
Mm-hmm. Well, and everything, stories, whether we like it or not, are also a product of our time. So,
Yeah.
you know, Tolkien grew up in the time when England, and this may be offensive to some people. I don't mean it that way. I'm not a historian, so I could definitely be a little off on this, but it feels like, understanding the rise of the British Empire and, the empire that the sun never sat upon, the early 1900s to the mid 1900s is kind of that big time of change where they were losing a lot of.
So, the English Empire effectively waned after the Second World War, as did
Mm-hmm.
all of Europe's empires,
Right.
right? Because if you blow up your own continent twice, you tend to lose a lot of resources, and then you don't
Yeah.
have the resources to kind of stamp your colonial boots all over other people's land. Um, and that was basically why the British Empire declined and the French and everybody else.
Right. And so he was
Was
already old when he was working on that book, so he had already lived through that, and I feel like
Yeah,
that influenced a lot of his
yeah, yeah.
thinking. And everybody's afraid of change. All of us are afraid of change. Some of us are more afraid than others, but that's a human thing that we just don't like change. And so he saw his world drastically changing from, when he was born, this strong monarchy to, it got weaker and weaker and so on and so forth. So I think that it would
Um,
impact the way he would think.
yes, but I mean, he never really grew up under a strong monarchy as such, right? But, I mean, when he was born, it would have been Queen Victoria on the throne. And while she wasn't it was already a constitutional monarchy at that point. You know,
Right.
it wasn't like the king couldn't make executive decisions. It wasn't
Right.
like an absolute, the king had to act in conjunction
Mm-hmm.
with their parliament because parliament held the purse strings.
Right.
So, and that had been an established rule since Charles lost his head. I think it was one of the Charleses.
Mm-hmm.
It's been a while since I studied it.
Yeah. I
But yeah,
don't. I don't have that knowledge.
but yeah, and I mean, people often make that mistake. They think like she was called the Empress of the Empire, and she had more power than say Elizabeth did, right? Elizabeth II, but she didn't hold like like a whip
Yeah, but I
cracking
wasn't even talking about
executive
reality.
power.
I wasn't talking about
Yeah.
reality. I was actually talking
Yeah.
about you still have a society that's changing over that generation,
Mm,
and it doesn't matter what reality is, it's perception. And his
yeah.
life, he saw his world going from one type of thing
Mm,
to, over those 60, 70 years to something else. So when I'm just
yeah.
saying, I'm just guessing that was something of his time that impacted him and how he saw the
I,
world and the symbology that he
he,
wanted to put in his story,
yeah.
and something that I wouldn't have as an American.
I think the other thing is that he probably grew up on Shakespeare, and
Mm-hmm.
Shakespeare has a lot of like Queen Elizabeth is so great, she's the best because she gives me money, so I'm gonna gild her lily. You know what I mean? Like Shakespeare gilds Elizabeth the First's lily and that of her ancestors going all the way back. You know what I mean? Like, and I think
Again,
that.
product of his time. That's kind of my
Absolutely.
point.
She was his patron. There
Right.
was no way he was going to do anything else,
Yeah.
right? So so because Shakespeare gilded that lily so very much, and because of course Tolkien would have grown, I mean, Shakespeare's always been popular, but in England,
Right.
very popular,
Especially during that
especially since
time.
the monarchy still traces their roots back to, Elizabeth and blah blah blah, despite the fact that she never had children. But anyway, um, their bloodline is weird. Anyway, so, so, so she, he perhaps looked back at that like Shakespearean age of, having a king like good Queen Bess kind of.
Yeah. Well, let's go through these kind of one at a time. So, starting with the surface story, I mean, one of the things about plots and events, and I've been preaching this for decades, this is the thing that I think so many new writers or writers that are just kind of telling stories off of gut instinct instead of like really understanding this as a process and everything else, they feel is the story, is the whole story. Like, oh no, the farm boy is going to meet the wizard who's going to give him the sword, who's going to tell him about the dragon, and he's going to go slay the dragon, and that is the story. There is nothing else. It is just that story. And I think, and I understand it. I mean, this is where the actions are, this is where the events
Mm,
are, this is where the goals are, this is the thing that you see. And that's why when I teach like theme, I talk about the physical layer and the invisible layer. And so the
yeah,
physical layer is that it's all of those things, but it is not the story. It's not even the
yeah.
story. It's not even a piece of the story. It's the window dressing on top that's used to deliver the story.
And if the physical layer is all you've got, it doesn't matter how well you write it, it's going to feel like a hollow vessel, right?
Every time.
It's gonna be a hollow story. But I do want to also issue a different warning. If you put all of your effort into the layers below it, and the physical is just this kind of like weak little sketch, then you run into the opposite problem.
Yeah.
It's like it either feels like a hammer blow to the head, or it feels
You're
like
preaching a sermon.
boring. Yeah, or it's boring,
Mm-hmm.
it's just it goes nowhere and you have to like fish for these little thematic elements, or it feels like you're preaching a sermon, or so there is a fine line.
Yeah.
The plot events have to be good, they have to be engaging, they have to be fun, they have to
Yes.
be memorable. All of those things have to be there.
Yes.
Like,
100%.
I don't know
And I
if
constantly have to do
anybody.
that. I have to do that when I'm teaching the class because
Yeah.
to teach the invisible layer, I kind of come down pretty hard on the physical layer negatively because I'm trying to really get them to understand that that's not where the story is. But then I always have
Mm,
to circle around and go, now, don't get me wrong. Like the physical layer is vitally important and we need it to be awesome because it is what the reader sees, but it's not what the
yeah.
reader takes away with them. So to
Yeah.
your point, if you've ever read a story that you got to the end of and you were just like meh, but you start thinking about it, you're like, well, I like the characters, and I mean the events were cool,
Mm.
and it seemed like the world building was great and the writing was fine, but I don't know. There's just I didn't like it. It's because it was hollow. It was just that physical layer, just that,
Yeah.
event, that surface layer. And the writer doesn't understand what a story actually is. And so kind of the big that's
I
kind of the big
think that
problem with it.
I think that one can very easily kind of demonstrate this as a by talking about two different Star Wars, recent Star Wars things. The movie, not the Phantom Menace, Episode 7. The no, yeah, Episode 7, right?
Yeah,
Uh,
basically episode 4 revisited.
Episode 4 revisited. It had no interiority.
Right.
It was essentially just, it was a fun plot. Of course, it was a plot we've seen before, but it was a fun plot. It was a good plot. There was nothing wrong with it, but there was nothing underneath it.
Mm-mm.
It was empty inside.
Mm-hmm.
And that was why it was just bleh,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
Um,
because you can't say the physical layer is bad because we all love that exact same physical layer in episode 4.
yeah,
Like nothing was
yeah.
different. You
That
meet
exact
the
same physical layer worked in 1979,
yeah, you
but the thematic elements were completely missing,
yeah.
right? And okay, I'm not going to go down the path of discussing this in Jungian archetypes. We'll save that for another episode. Because the Jungian archetypes were wrong in episode 7, and
Yeah.
that's why it didn't work. But anyway, like different discussion, not for right now. um, the plot events were fine in and of themselves. They just had nothing underneath them. And so the movie crumpled under its own weight, right? Um, on the other hand, I don't know if anybody's watched Andor, the TV series, but that's brilliant. That is brilliant. And it builds off the movie Rogue One,
Mm.
right? And that was the best of the Star Wars movies because it had thematic weight. It had things going on underneath it. It was stories about what compromises do you have to make in
Mm-hmm.
order to make a rebellion work?
Mm-hmm.
What do you have to do? Like how many ways do you have to betray yourself for a larger goal? And are you right to do so? And those are deep, wrestle-worthy questions.
Yeah.
And they had in the second season, they had a great outer layer as well. In the first season of Andor, I felt that episode 1 and 2 were very light on the outer layer, but they were intense enough to carry me through, right, into the better elements. But they were light on that, and so it is a fine balance, and it is a difficult one to strike, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I don't judge a writer for falling one side or the other. It does happen, but try and make sure that you've got a strong plot layer, but it's not all you've got. So I mean, a story that's all theme and no plot, or books like Albert Camus' The Stranger, or Dostoevsky's Scapegoat. So stories that are not about per se the plot and events. They're philosophy books. They're
Mm-hmm.
meant they show a vague fictional scenario, but the purpose of the fictional scenario is to communicate a philosophy to you.
Yeah.
Isaac Asimov's books are like that for me personally. Like I feel
Some
he's
of them.
very light on plot and
Yeah.
very heavy on theme.
Yeah.
And I mean that's fine, but I
I
don't
For me, the
read
road
that.
is like that.
Yeah. So, and it's fine. Like I read books like that, but I read books like that when I'm in the mood to explore a philosophy, not when I'm in the mood to read something.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, some of the talking points that I have on this. So why isn't plot enough? Why isn't just telling a story with events? Why does that fail?
So I think it fails because we want to be engaged on multiple levels. As humans, I feel like all of us to even if we don't actively engage in philosophy or whatever, we do want to understand the world around us. We do want to look up at the sky and be like, I wonder what causes lightning, and then have some kind of a reason for it, right? And that reason can evolve over the years as we learn things and tell stories and so on. And I think that the sense of wonder and exploration exists in all of us, and stories are a way to do that, but only if they engage us at all levels, including the philosophical one, which is the not
Yeah.
plot line.
For me, um, it's the same thing that you just said, but just skewed slightly different. For me, it's we want to feel something. We want to be impacted by something. And you don't feel something when the Death Star is blown up. You don't feel something when a dragon is killed. You don't feel something, you know, when any of these things happen. They are the catalyst that, depending on the ramifications of the Death Star blowing up or the dragon dying or whatever, those are the things that make you feel, and those are the things that then you walk away from with the story, you know. And I've verbed Michael Bay's name because that's what he does. He is a physical layer, only storyteller. No one goes into a Michael Bay movie expecting to be emotionally moved by the story. You watch a bunch of cool explosions and it's fun. He's gotten all my money. I'm definitely not digging on him. I've seen
Yeah.
every Michael Bay movie, but they are shallow. They are very, very, very shallow. But that's why I don't think Michael Bay could ever be successful as a novelist, because when you're in the visual medium, I'll pay you 12, $15 to watch some cool explosions and some high energy chase scenes and some cool fight scenes and all of that, and I'll feel that I've gotten my money's worth. Now, I'll never watch that movie the second time. I'll never I'll never think about that movie later. I'll never be, like, yeah, but what do you think the message, what do you think he was trying to say in Transformers? Like, what was the humanizing thing that's going to change me as a human being? I'm not going to do any of that. Like, there's nothing there. There's nothing to think
Mm.
about. So I think that's the reason why the if you just have the physical layer, if you just have the plot and the events, especially in a novel, because in a novel, we don't get to see the actual explosions. We don't get to see the actual anything. We literally are just in our heads. And so I think if all you have in a novel is the plot and the events and we're just going to go here and kill a dragon, that the reader walks away going, I don't know. I mean, there was nothing wrong with the story and the characters, but and then the problem is that if they feel that way, they're probably never going to buy another product from that author again. And that's
Yeah.
not how you can make a career out of this.
Yeah.
So that's, for me, the big problem with writing a novel where you just focus on the physical layer stuff. It's not to turn it into that type of discussion, because this is also a discussion for another time, but it is probably the biggest reason why AI does not make me afraid as a writer, because AI literally is stuck at that physical layer. Like, it doesn't mean that it can't throw.
Actually, our current AI is not even at the physical layer. Our current AI is spicy autocomplete.
Right.
Like,
It is. But I mean, it can still put together, at least in short form,
yeah.
it does completely fall apart the longer it goes, because it doesn't have the ability to hold that continuity. But for a short story or whatever, it can throw out a physical layer story
Mm.
that actually is kind of cool. People, that is actually the danger. And again, I don't want to turn this into an AI discussion, but that is the danger, where they'll like write me a little story about this and they'll get 1,000 word story and like, wow, this is great, because all physical layer. And then they're like,
Mm.
I could use this to write 100,000 word novel. And then it just, after that first 1,000 words, it, it,
Yeah.
it takes that nosedive, in continuity and everything like that. But still, that is the biggest reason why I don't fear AI, because it literally is just that top layer, just this layer that we're talking about. And so you're still going to have stories that leave the reader unfulfilled. They're going to
Yeah.
walk out of there just like, ah, I wanted more.
Yeah.
And again, this is the average person. There are people out there that just want the Michael Bay, you know, and that is literally what they're looking for. That's what they want. They're fulfilled by that. But I think, especially in the novel arena, those fans are way more rare than the ones that are expecting to have something in that novel that affects them on a human level. And so
Yeah.
that's where everything else that we're going to talk about kind of falls into play. So let's get into the second arc. Um, so character arc,
Relation.
yeah, character arcs, relationship arcs. This is who it is happening to and how they are changed. Their emotional, their psychological transformation, um, usually driven by their needs and their wants. You know, that's
Yeah.
the thing that's going to
And
drive this.
also, it's also, remember, I'm always coming at it from like a, a society level because I'm wired that way, right? And um, and it's also like, what does the society regard as the society that they're in regard as an acceptable relationship? And this is a great place to play with thematic elements of acceptable relationships. What are they, what aren't they, and so on. Like, um, is it acceptable to be in a open relationship, in a closed relationship? These are things that you bring into that layer. Like,
Yeah.
what is the thematic purpose of your relationship? What is the relationship between parents? I read a very weird story not long ago. And I can't for the life of me remember what it was, so please don't ask me. But it was a story where people are picked to um, to be stoned in a village in order to ensure the harvest for the year. And a woman is chosen randomly by lot, and she tries to get out of it because, I mean, obviously, like, um, and even her family is picking up rocks to, like, even her children are picking up rocks,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
because this is the culture,
Right.
you know.
And that's one of the hardest things. And um, that's where I think so many writers today fail because we live in a world where, especially the younger generations, are trying to rewrite or feel that all of history should follow our moral compass of today. So, like the movie series that I was hired to write, it is literally based in polygamy. Like that
Mm.
is its that's its reality, that's its norm, that's its the way it is. And you know, me and my wife have been married 25 years. We've been together 28 years. I believe in that. That society I came from. Um, so if I was to then take this society and change it to my moral compass, it completely would destroy, because that's what would be the negative now. Instead of just this is the way it is, this is just normal. Of course I have four wives. Why wouldn't I have four wives? Why don't you have four wives? Like, this is just the way it is. You're
Yeah.
stupid if you don't have this. So if I was to
Well,
take
probably more likely you're poor and can't afford it, you cheapskate.
right, right, you're a homeless beggar. That's why you don't
Yeah.
have four
You
wives.
only have one wife. Like,
Yeah. Yeah. What, you don't own a BMW? You drive a Yugo? Um,
exactly.
we kind of have the same thing still. Um, but yeah, so if I was to take my moral compass and put it in there, it would destroy this story and what it needs to be told as, even though that does not match our modern day, you know, moral compass. And it's fine.
Yeah, so I just want to say two things quickly. One is that the Peanut Gallery said the story might have been Shirley Jackson's The Lottery, and that does sound correct. So, so I just wanted to shout out that. But the second one is it's not actually. I know people like to say people do it today, but actually people have rewritten history in this way
Oh, certainly.
quite often and quite frequently, and for much the same reasons. I mean, the fairy tales that people are going so ballistic over these days, Snow White and the Seven Dwarves and whatever, like in the 50s, Disney sanitized those things,
Hmm.
but they'd already been sanitized 200 years earlier by Hans Christian Andersen, who took
Hmm.
those stories before they became, Andersen's fairy tales. They were horror tales,
Right.
right? These are not the
Yeah.
dwarves were not
Yeah,
it's
I'm definitely not saying that it's a new phenomenon.
yeah,
What is new is that we have never lived in a time where information is as easily disseminated to the entire population as it is now.
100%. And that's but I mean that's also why there are so many conflicts about these changes, right? Because back when Hans Christian Andersen was doing it, the one village that told the original story might have objected to his kind of, his
If they even
sanctification
heard
of the
about it.
story, if they'd even heard about it.
Right.
But really, the rest of the world just had his book. In the
Right.
1950s, when Disney went and, really prettified it and made the fucking, you know, dwarves sing, I it's off to work I go. Um, so when that happened, like they had the complete corner on the market. People might have had the original fairy tale books, sure, but the movie version was out there and solidified by them.
Well, and
You
also
know?
consumed by
Yeah,
a factor more people. Like who knows,
yeah,
a factor of
exactly,
10, a factor of 50, a factor of
exactly.
100. And that's what's happened today is that with the internet and the information age, now who can consume this stuff is once again a factor more.
But what has also happened now is you have many conflicting narratives, which is the
Hmm.
first time we've had this, right? Because previously it was whoever got their narrative out on the media, like had the control of it. Nobody's going to compete with Anderson or with Disney or whatever. But these
Right.
days, any two fools can hop onto YouTube and share their opinion with the world.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
And and so you get many conflicting narratives. And I think that's part of what drives all the like, this is not the way I remember it, or this is not what true history is, or whatever. Like,
Yeah.
you know, it's
Although
just
you would still have somebody in their home ranting, holding a book of the Christian Anderson, going, "This is not the way it is," but no one would ever know. No one would hear the person,
exactly,
and no one would care. Now
exactly.
that person
Whereas,
can go on the internet and go, "This is not the way it is,"
no,
and everyone has to deal with it. So yeah, that's the big difference. All right, getting back to this. So a couple of the thinking points that I wrote down. Um, let's talk about the difference between a flat arc and either a positive arc or a negative arc for a character when it comes to relation. Actually, you know what? Before there's something I wrote down that I wanted to say. Kind of a way to think about this. The plot is what the character does. So going back to that first layer, the plot is what the character does. The character arc, this relationship, this second layer, is what the story does to the character.
yes.
So that's what's going to lead me into the discussion because we do have characters that have flat arcs. We have
Mm,
characters that have positive arcs that change for the better, and we have character arcs that where they change for the worse.
yeah.
So let's just banter that around for a minute, those three things, and because I'm not saying someone might think, oh well, flat arcs, you definitely don't want to do that, but actually,
There are very legitimate reasons for having
yeah,
a flat arc.
yeah,
Obi-Wan Kenobi is a flat arc in Star Wars in episode 4.
yeah,
Um, because he is the main character. You don't necessarily want the main character to change. You want them to be the state of stability, right?
Morpheus.
Morpheus in The
Morpheus
Matrix.
doesn't grow, doesn't change.
Yeah,
He's like, this is what I believe. This is the reality that I'm going to live with. And this is the reality that I will die with without ever thinking that I'm
yeah,
wrong.
exactly.
So, yeah, flat arcs are not negative. It's just that, the two examples we just used here were mentor arcs.
Yeah.
Normally, the actual protagonist of the story, that's hard to have a flat arc. Um, Now, it's been a long time since I read this. It's the only book when I was a teenager that I didn't finish. I got I got 50 pages from the third book, and I realized that it was never going to do anything. So why do I even bother reading the last 50 pages of the third book? But that was the Chronicles of Thomas Covenant. Um, because I don't
I got
know.
10
And again,
pages in and
I
put the
was a
book down.
teenager when I read it, but I just
Yeah.
feel like that's the ultimate example of a flat arc for a protagonist that
Yeah.
just killed me as a person that would read. I would read anything and be impressed by it. Back of a shampoo bottle, this is the best thing ever written. And I couldn't read that. So that should tell you something about how I feel about that series. And if you're a fan of it, great. Awesome for you.
Yeah.
It's subjective. You're right. It is great for you. I'm right. It is bad for me. That is the definition of subjective. But
I I lost it at Thomas Covenant when we were like, I don't know. He just translated into the second world, the through the portal. And he what is the internet slang these days? He graped the girl.
oh, I don't remember that. I don't remember
Yeah.
much of it. I was probably 12, 13 when I read it.
Yeah. I just,
The only
you
thing I
know.
remember, and this is what we take away from most books, we just take away what it makes us feel. We don't
Mm,
necessarily, we can remember some events or whatever. We don't necessarily remember every single event. We don't remember, see, that event made you feel something. And that's why you remember that event. I was probably 12 and
mm.
it didn't have the impact on me at 12 as it would have on me now. And so I don't remember that event. What I remember is feeling constantly, wow, this has the potential in the next, 20, 30 pages to be amazing. And then 20, 30 pages later, I'd go, wow, this has the potential in about 20, 30, 50 pages to be amazing. And
Yeah.
that's what I felt for. And when I got, it was so funny because I was 50 pages from the end. And I
Yeah.
literally said to myself, wow, this feels like it has the potential to be amazing in 50. The book's over in 50 pages. This is not going to be amazing. They've lied to you. Stop reading. And it's the first book in my life that I ever stopped reading. I had never not finished a book, even books that I hated before that. I had never stopped reading them. So that, in my opinion, is a great example of a flat arc that is bad. Now, again, I haven't read it in 40 some odd years, so I could be very wrong
Mm.
on what I remember. I mean,
So
just an
you,
example of that,
like,
I up until I
yeah.
was probably about 35, 38. If you had asked me what the scariest movie ever made was, I would say Phantasm without even blinking. And then I met Reggie Bannister, the guy who wrote it and directed it and acted in it and all of that. And we became friends. And I was like, man, I haven't seen his movie in forever because it's terrifying. Because I think I was like 9 when I saw it. And then I watched it at like 38 and I was like, why did I think this was scary? This is silly. It was almost like Army of Darkness silly. You know, it was kind of that tongue in cheek kind of horror movie.
It will
Um,
always be Silence of the Lambs for me.
yeah, that's a
God,
good
that movie
one.
gave me nightmares.
But, I'm just saying that from what I remember as a child versus what the reality of it actually is. So I could be
Yeah.
wrong on Thomas Covenant, so don't send me hate mail. Um, but that's what I remember. I
Let
just
us know in the
remember,
comments if we're wrong about Thomas Covenant.
yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
But yeah,
just not
so
in a hateful way.
yeah, actually it's fine. Negative engagement, still engagement. The algorithm loves you. So fight in the comments.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's
Anyway,
fine. I don't read the comments until you say, "Hey, here's one you have to read," and then I'm like, "Okay, fine."
so that's flat arcs. Uh, Positive arcs are the more common one with protagonists, and they're generally your upward growth arc. So it's where somebody grows from a kind of what we would see as or what the story sees as a negative emotion to a positive emotion.
Yeah. In the story of Finding Nemo, Marlin
Yeah.
starts as an overprotective parent. The story is showing that that is the wrong way to be a parent. Again, that's what the story's showing. You can believe whatever you want to believe. And then at the end, he becomes a non-overprotective parent, a parent who is actively encouraging his child to experiment and try new things and
Yeah.
get out there and take a few risks. So that is what you would consider as a positive story arc for that character.
And then a negative story arc is where you would grow down. So an example of this is, Macbeth starts as ambitious but loyal and ends as murderous, and disloyal and still ambitious. So he is driven on a downward arc in the story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, there's no right way, there's no wrong way. It depends on what you're trying to do. Again, this is all feeding into the deeper roots of the story of what we want the reader to feel. So
Mm,
sometimes we need a character that doesn't grow positively or negatively, because in not growing, it's going to force the reader to feel something. It's going to
yeah.
force them to experience something. Sometimes we need that positive arc because that's what we need to have the reader experience something. Sometimes we need the negative arc because that's what we're going to do. So there's no wrong answer to this. You are right. The positive arcs are by far the most common. They are also by far the easier to write. They are
Yeah.
by far the more, they have the most chances of becoming mass market successes because more people want to have something positive in their life than negative in their life. Grimdark is a reality. It's an actual genre, but it definitely isn't one of the bigger genres. There's a select mindset that goes, you know what I want to do to fantasy fulfill? I want to get kicked in the teeth and be pooped on and have roaches shoved down my throat and then just left that way with nothing good happening after it. There's a certain person needed to really enjoy grimdark. I'm not one of them, but it exists. I mean, there are readers out there for it. So it's just, that's kind of the three things with those. I mean, I don't really have anything else to say about them other than the fact
No,
that we do have those
let's.
three arcs. Well, there's one other talking point that I'd like to banter with you on character arcs,
Yeah.
because there's another big difference between external character arc or external stakes. Let's call it that.
Mm,
External stakes versus internal stakes. And
mm.
I think there's some massive differences in what the story can do depending on which way you're going. You want to
Okay.
throw your ideas on external stakes and internal stakes, and then we'll just banter it?
All right. So external stakes is what is at stakes if they fail. Right?
Mm-hmm.
The world's gonna end. I'm an epic fantasy writer. The world's always gonna end.
Yeah, exactly.
Or
Or they're going to lose a
or they
job. They're going to
or
lose
they're
a
gonna lose
spouse.
their
They're going to
coffee
lose,
shop if they're a
right.
cozy
They're going to lose
fantasy writer.
their livelihood, whatever.
Yeah, whatever. Um, so so what are your external stakes? Your internal stakes is what is going to happen inside the character if they fail their growth arc. They're going to perhaps fall to being this cold, emotionless, but successful person. Maybe they succeed in saving the world, but they're now this ice-driven, like person with no connection to anyone around them.
Ebenezer Scrooge.
Exactly. You
He's
know.
a cold, uh, um, calculated businessman that has no friends, and his friend Marley comes in and says, "I'm now suffering because I was like you.
Yeah.
If you don't want to end up like me, you need to learn." And so
Yeah.
his internal stakes are, yes, there's some external stakes there too, because
Mm.
Tiny Tim's going to die if he
Yeah.
doesn't change. So that's an external, kind of stakes. But I mean, he's not.
Yeah.
I mean, it's his employee's child. Like, who cares? If he doesn't want
Yeah.
to, it doesn't really affect his life, as opposed to the internal stakes are, if you don't learn, if you don't grow as a human being, if you don't become more caring and
Mm.
giving and compassionate, you will spend eternity suffering. And so that's those internal stakes of, we can either stay the personality we are and suffer because of it, or we can grow and change internally
Mm.
and get there. That's why I think Ebenezer Scrooge is probably one of the best examples of the internal story arc.
Yeah.
External, I think everybody gets. Um, again, world's going to destroy. You're going to lose your coffee shop, whatever. Tiny Tim's going to die. Um,
I like to call the internal stakes the emotional stakes
mm-hmm.
because I feel like that is a good way to express what they are. What is emotionally at stake for the character?
That is a good way to look at it. I look at it more of a the humanity stakes. Do you stay somebody who is negative for humanity, or do you change into something that is a positive influence on humanity?
Mm.
It does, it is a part of your emotions and everything like that. That's a good way to look at it as well. But for me, it's more of a how do you what's your contribution to society? Do you stay the tyrant? Do you stay the selfish, whatever, or do you stay the overprotective parent in Marlon's case that that just smothers your child and never lets them turn into an adult?
Yeah.
Or do you internally change into something that is going to help those around you?
I read the most interesting, no, I watched the most interesting anime a couple months ago called Fire Ren, which started at the end of the epic quest. They've defeated the Demon King. They come home to the city for the parade. Like that was episode one, the first 5 minutes. Them entering the city and everybody going, the Demon King is dead.
Wow.
And it was fascinating because the whole story is about the elf. It's basically a D&D party, right? But the elf is immortal. And now she's like, okay, what are we going to do next? And everybody's like, I'm going home to my family. I'm going to go spend my last few years with my children. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do it. And the elf's like, what do I do?
Right.
You know? And it's her fighting, with her immortality and her inability to
What's the name
connect.
of
And
it?
that it was beautifully done. It's Fire Ren. It's an anime.
How do you spell that?
It's, oh, I will send it to you. 'Cause I can't remember how to spell it either.
Because that sounds interesting.
Firen, there we go. Peanut galleries provided it. Firen, Beyond Journey's End. It is
Frieren,
REN,
and then
Beyond Journey's End.
Beyond Journey's End.
It is so good. I highly recommend it to everybody who's looking for a very, very fascinating look at like forging connections and what those connections mean. Um, it
Interesting.
was really good.
Yeah, I may try and check. I mean, I just don't watch anything anymore. Um, I'm working 7 days a week, 16 hours a
Mm.
day.
I
Um,
know.
well, but that leads us to your next layer,
Mm.
which is the societal layer. So, you know, what the world is, who holds the power. This is the layer where the story engages culture and systems and classes and races and genders and politics and
Mm.
institutions, collective identity. Um, you know, it answers the question of what kind of society does the story take place in, and how does that story shape the character, or how does that, not story, but how does that shape the characters? So
How
what
does that
is
shape the
your
characters? So I've got two ways of looking at this. One is how does it shape the characters? What is its impact on the plot layer, on the emotional layer, and so on? But I also sometimes like to work from the character back up there because I have a penchant. The reason why I write political fantasy is because I have a penchant for changing institutions,
mm-hmm,
for showing how hard it is to change institutions, for showing why sometimes it is worth the fight to change them. For like this interests me. It interests me how institutions change, why they change, what happens afterwards, etc. And and so I like to give society an arc as well, and to be like, what is society at the beginning of my story? And what will it be at the end of my story? How will it have changed?
Yeah. Um, some of the things that I was thinking about with this would be like, um, what values are rewarded
Yeah.
because of the society around them, or what does the character have to believe to even survive in this society, or what happens to them if they
How
break
do
the
they have to
rules.
behave? Like if you're
Yeah,
in a theocracy, for example, right? And let's say you don't believe in the gods. If you make that statement boldly and proudly, what happens to you?
right.
Like what is the result?
Yeah, yeah. So those are the things that I think can bring, when you think about that societal level, that societal relationship levels, you bring a lot to the story. You can bring a lot
Mm,
of conflicts, and can bring a lot of tension. And this is where you get a lot of stories that will focus on this layer are your
mm,
stories that don't even need an antagonist as a person.
yeah,
It could be the system that's the antagonist. So V for Vendetta, there's no real and single antagonist that's trying to destroy them. Even the Matrix, sure, we have Mr. or Agent Smith, but he really isn't. He's just an allegory for the system. He's not the
yeah,
actual. He's not the actual system, you know.
yeah,
And so that's kind of the thing with that. And so there's a lot of things, or they can be like in Logan's Run, a character who
mm,
didn't choose to be in this system. They were born there,
mm,
and then in their growing up, they realize this system doesn't work for me like I thought
yeah,
it was going to work. And I love the Logan Drunk example because we're talking about a person who believed in the system so much he killed people who didn't believe in the system.
yeah,
And then when the system turned on him, he was like, "Oh wait, I don't believe in the system anymore." So I mean, that's a huge
yeah,
shift from "I believe in it so much I will kill you if you don't believe in it" to "Oh crap, I don't believe in it. Now people who used to have my job or who had my old job are trying to kill me because I don't believe in it."
yeah.
So
Both 1984 and I guess Brave New World. I don't know. Have you ever read Brave New World?
I have not.
It's very interesting. But 1984 certainly the system is
Right,
there are bad people who prop up the system, but the system as a whole is the antagonist. The
right.
whole layer of society is the antagonist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's where you can get a lot of this. And this is when the story, we're talking about when the story focuses on this layer,
Mm,
but that doesn't mean that you have to focus on this layer to tell a story.
no.
Like that's the thing about with us being epic fantasy writers, we spend a lot of time on society and the societal layer. Your society layer impacts your story way more than my societal layer impacts my
Mm,
stories normally, because that's just not where I'm interested. I mean, that's what makes storytellers different. We're interested about
yeah.
exploring different aspects of humanity. You're very interested in the societal side, the bigger picture kind of stuff, and a
Yeah.
lot of your stories center around that. Whereas I'm more interested in the common Joe that is having to make these decisions and do this thing for their own existence, and society is that backdrop that is
Yeah.
either negatively impacting them or positively impacting them or whatever. So and that's why there's so many writers and there's so many different stories and there's so many different things, because it depends on what
But
that
even if
writer is
you
interested in pursuing.
even if you don't focus on it, you have to understand what that layer does to your antagonist and how it
Yeah,
interacts with your plot events.
yeah, the big thing, so the danger for me, um I guess we did the danger for the plots, but we didn't do the danger for the personal relationships, so I'll just kind of combine them up here. The dangers of not paying attention to your relationship arcs, your character arcs, your internal,
Mm,
external, and this is kind of the same thing with societal. Now, with the relationship side, we kind of talked about the plots, because if you don't have that, you have a flat story that especially in a
Yeah.
novel, there's nothing for the person to walk away from. But in the societal level, if you just ignore it completely, your world doesn't feel real. And that means that the foundation that the story is built on feels not real. And that will trickle up to everything. It'll literally, it's just like building a
Yeah.
house on sand. It's not going to
And
stay.
I will raise another problem, and that is the problem of discordant layers. All right. Let's say you say, okay, my society is a collectivist layer. They believe in society being, the people's relationships with each other is the kind of cornerstone of their whole society. So a society like that does not generally ascribe personal blame, okay? Because the society lives or dies on the society's strength, right? And on their relationships. Now, if you take Dostoevsky's scapegoat, or even like the Christian mythos of this one dude takes the world's sins and dies for it. That doesn't work in a collectivist society, right? It doesn't work as a myth which naturally arises there because the whole society, it's like Confucian philosophy and Menecus's philosophy is built on the principle of a society must be just for their definition of justice at all levels, every relationship, because any society that has a, a element, it's the society as a whole that succeeds or fails. And if you have that kind of society and now you build in like these scapegoat stories, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
It
Where,
feels like the whole thing is wonky.
right. Yeah. As opposed to, a society that relies on individualism.
Yeah,
Um, now the individual is responsible for their own actions, their own
yeah,
good or evil, their own, self
yeah,
maintenance. And so that's a completely different society that's going to bring different values, different, the whole nine yards.
exactly. And you can't take and that's exactly, you can't take a collectivist society's myths and legends and paste them on top of a rugged individualist society.
Mm-hmm.
Like again, it's going to feel incoherent.
Yeah. It for fear of, you know, having hate mail thrown at you, it's going to feel like American politics
Well,
because
I don't know.
we have
So
two different societies.
so
Um,
so regardless, like it's not from a European perspective, you don't.
right. I get that.
Anyway, um, so regardless, it's important to consider the kind of all of the basis of your society and how it builds up, and to make sure that it's all kind of coherent, or if it's incoherent, that there is a reason for the incoherency. You can bring in Dostoevsky's, scapegoat if you have missionaries coming in from an individualistic society to a collectivist society, bringing their philosophy. This is a thing that has happened, can happen, and then it feels weird and inconsistent until people have negotiated with a myth sufficiently to integrate them.
Yeah. And
But then that is a thing that you're doing in your story.
which has conflict value and drama and
Yes,
all those things that we're going to bring in, which is exactly what the story thrives on.
yes, exactly. Yeah,
All right. That brings us to the emotional layer. So
yes,
this is that visceral textural layer of, you know, how does it feel? Fear, longing, dread, hope. Um, what emotions are the scenes designed to evoke in the reader?
yes. And also, what does the story say about emotions,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, in mythology specifically, it's about what is appropriate within a culture, what is appropriate for, the character to feel at this point. what is inappropriate and why. But when you're doing a storytelling that's not, mythological based, how I look at the emotional level is, what is the emotional arc of the story? What what am I doing here? What is the heart that is here? And how does it tie into everything?
Yeah, pacing and the contrast,
Mm,
like laughing before a tragedy or laughing after a
yeah.
tragedy or whatever. It definitely deals with tone and mood, and
Mm,
all of that. But we are getting long in the tooth, so I'm gonna throw the one question that I have in here that I think is the most
yeah.
interesting for me that I want you to talk about in us banter. What's the difference, or why should I think about um, a story that evokes empathy out of the reader versus sympathy out of the reader?
So for me, you want the difference between empathy and sympathy is a very fine one, right? So sympathy is, I feel sorry for you, right? Empathy is, I feel for you.
Right. Yeah. Sympathy
And
is that I feel pity for you.
yeah,
Um, I'm going to treat you differently because of this thing. And empathy is your pain is my pain.
yes.
We are the same in
Yeah.
this pain. And
We
so,
are the
from a
same in
story
this
standpoint,
pain, in this joy, and so on. And as a,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
so,
yeah,
yeah. So as in your reader, you don't always want to evoke the exact same emotion as in your character, as we've discussed on a previous episode, right? Because sometimes you don't actually want the reader to feel what the character's feeling. You want the reader to have empathy for where the character is at, not to experience the character's emotions. But you want the reader to have empathy for the characters, to understand where the characters are coming from, so
it it
that,
it depends
yeah,
because it can get you into trouble. It's like this thing that I'm working on, this movie thing. The My wife read it, and I was like, "What'd you think?" And she's like, "Well, I can tell you what did you like about it?" And she's like, "Well, I can tell you what I didn't like about it." And what did you say the kids say about it? Uh, Grape juice. Is that what you said? So she said, "You made me empathize with the grape juice character." Um, and she didn't like that. She just wanted to despise him
yes,
because he was, because of his grape juice
yes.
um, incident. But the way I wrote it, I humanized it. I didn't glorify it. He's still 100% a bad person in doing it. I just made the reader see things from his perspective, not agree with his perspective, but just see it from his perspective. And it's such a
So
detesting. I mean, grape juice sucks. No one likes grape juice. Um, so
no one likes grape juice now. The thing is, the time period where your story is set,
right,
it didn't exist in the same way because sex was something that an active participant did to an inactive object that was, and it was about like what damage you inflict
right,
to the property of somebody else.
right.
And in that, I mean, that story is actually a perfect example of how the society changes the plot because
Yeah,
the grape is not the problem.
right.
Yeah.
Mm-mm.
Like,
No, it wasn't.
yeah. And that is, it is difficult to write. I mean, I'm having that with my slavery story, right? It is difficult to write past your own modernity and your own, like, I feel so ick
Yeah,
writing this, you know,
yeah,
like,
yeah,
and, and, and but you sometimes you need that in order for the story to work because you're
Right.
writing for a certain perspective or certain timeline, or in your case you're effectively writing a historical tale, so
Yeah.
you have to be true to that historical period and its
And
culture. Otherwise,
and
again, the story is incoherent.
right. And this is why I
Yeah.
think that so many stories fail today, with so many stories trying to put modern day sensibilities into an environment, a society, whatever, that it just doesn't exist. It didn't exist. We might would have liked to for it to have existed. We would prefer it would have existed, but it didn't. You know, I was trying to explain this to my son because he was like, he I said something. I said, we were talking about regret, and I said, yeah, I regret things. And he's like, oh, you should never do that. That's bad. And I was like, no, no, it's how you regret them. Like, so the other day I was changing the windshield wipers on my van. And so
Mm,
I had it up, I popped it off, I was fiddling with the box and the other one, and I accidentally the arm slipped out of my hand and shattered
mm,
my window. So now it's got spider web cracks across it. I
yeah,
regret that. I would love to have not have had that happen. But there's a difference in regretting. And what I was trying to explain to him is, just because I regret that it happened doesn't mean I sit here and pine over it
yeah.
and, let that regret eat at me and all of that. It's just, it's something that happened. I wish it hadn't. It did. There's nothing I can do about it. There's no magic button to go boop and go back in time. Because if there was, I'd be booping all the time. It's like, ooh, I spilled milk. Boop. Ooh,
Mm,
I broke my
yeah.
shoelace. Boop. Like I'd be doing it for all sorts of dumb things. Um, but you know, it's just the
I
way
think
it is.
that's the thing that a lot of, and this is something that I see more in young men than anywhere else, is what they misunderstand. Like, I'm never asking anybody to be like in sackcloth and ashes because there was a patriarchal system. Like, it's not your fault. I don't blame you. And I'm not saying like it's you should do anything. I'm just saying like it is a thing that was there. Like, stop saying it wasn't. Like, both sides in this discussion.
Yeah. I mean, I don't blame the windshield wiper for arm for
Yeah,
breaking my windshield. I do
yeah.
blame the guy who designed it because he didn't put any type of stopgap on it to stop it from doing that. But yes, no, I get your point.
Yeah.
Some so next layer, symbolic metaphorical. So,
Yeah.
this is where your symbolism, your motifs, your reoccurring imagery, your allegories,
Mm,
this can be subtle, like a vase of flowers in the main entranceway. And as the story goes on, they wilt, they die, they
mm,
brown, they droop, and all of that. It could be right in your face, a dystopian society as a political commentation. Um,
mm,
so we have the sixth sense of the color red when he's speaking to dead people, whatever. So
yeah.
there's all sorts of ways to do this. Um, in Star Wars: A New Hope, the fourth movie, religion is the other side of theme. Now, there's no religion in that movie because the Force is an allegory for belief in a higher power, for religion.
Mhm.
Religion isn't there. And actually, usually when I say that to someone, even someone who's watched the movie a dozen times, they're like, "There's no religion." It's like, yeah, there isn't exactly.
Actually, the Star Wars movie is rife with symbology.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because you have the symbology of Leia in white. You have the symbology of Darth Vader in black. You never see his face until his mask comes off right at the end when he overcomes the dark side. You've got the two mirroring arcs. So
Mm-hmm.
the Darth Vader had failed, whereas Luke's goes up and he successfully overcomes the fall to the dark side
Mm-hmm.
and the temptation to use it. Um, and and so you there's a lot of symbology actually in
Yeah.
Star Wars. um, in
To
the first
me, this layer is probably the most impacted by show don't tell,
one. Mm.
because you're not telling anything. Like you're not, if you're set your thing in a
You
dystopian,
can't tell this layer. It doesn't matter
right?
whether you are writing in omniscient layer, in
Oh, you
omniscient.
could tell.
Yeah,
You
but it's
could,
not going to work because the moment
right?
you tell
Exactly.
somebody about the symbol loses all
Yeah.
impact. You cannot tell the symbolic layer and have it have impact. The symbolic layer has to be shown.
Yeah.
So,
And yeah, that's it. And that's why I said this is the layer that I think is the most show don't tell, because you can set your
and
world.
yeah, and the
You,
moment
you
somebody tells you what the symbol is, or what a symbolic thing is in a story or whatever, you can never unsee it, and it
right,
kind of loses all its impact because it's
right,
now like a thing that you're aware of.
right. Yeah. So as the example, I was going to say, if you do set your story in a dystopian society to talk about political, the
Mm,
political commentary of the world, and then you say, well, the whole reason why the world was destroyed was this. Yeah, it takes it takes that magic out of that symbolism and that
yeah.
metaphor that you're trying to play with.
Mm,
Um, so that's why I said this is the layer I think you really do have to focus on, just showing it and hoping that the reader picks up on it.
yeah.
Or, in the Sixth Sense case, hoping they don't pick up on it.
And
So
then
it just,
afterward, they're like, "Oh my God."
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, so anything to add to that one? We probably
No,
should, because
no.
that's the most complicated, the most unknown, the most mystical, the most mysterious of the layers. Um,
What the spiritual one or
no,
the symbolic one?
the symbolic one.
So the symbolic one is hard to pull off, but it's so and the best way to do it is to actually study our mythology, to
Mm-hmm,
really tease out every myth you can out of folk tales, out of fairy tales, out of everything, right? And tease out how they use symbology and how that symbology ties back to the societal layer, how it reinforces who has power.
mm-hmm,
You know, if you look at the kind of all of the Chinese myths, the early Chinese myths, they all enforce the concept of the heavenly mandate, right? Because that was a very central mythos to the Chinese emperors. If you look at like Western myths, the Greek myths, there's a lot of myths that talk about don't, don't kill your father, don't kill your parents, um, don't commit incest, don't do the like, and anybody who does comes to a bad end. So there's a lot of like anti-relationship stuff there.
mm-hmm.
And even if you look at like technological progress, for example, right? So Prometheus comes to us and he says, here is fire, and it's what enables our civilization. But he is punished by the gods for it because we should progress, but not so much that we challenge the gods. No, no, no.
Right.
Punishment lies that way.
Mm-hmm,
Heaven forfend that you should challenge a priest. You
right.
see, and you start seeing those patterns in the stories that
Right.
are being told.
Like
So that's the,
one of the weirdest realizations I ever realized of that, because I never noticed it. Not that I watched a lot of it anyway, because it was before my time. When you go back and you watch a lot of the shows from the 50s, when TV was just coming out, black and white, it's amazing at how many bad guys were gay. Like just over and the murderer, the robber, the like just over and over and over. And I remember when I made that realization where I was just kind of like, that guy's gay too. And then and that bad guy's gay too. And like it was weird to me.
my my example is always the fairy tale one. It's always the evil queen, and
Right.
it's never when she's married.
Right.
It's when she holds power in her own right, because a woman who holds power in her own right in the stories that go that far back, always the evil
Again,
one.
products of their
Yeah.
time.
Yeah, but it's these stories are told to reinforce systems, and
Hmm.
that's what I mean by symbology,
Hmm.
right? It's the same with the gay stories. It's why there is so much drive to have inclusion and diversity because like there's a lot. Anyway,
Yep.
I'm not going to go there.
Yeah. No, we
But
don't need to. Not in this episode
no,
because we're already running
but
long.
yeah, but symbology is about that. Is in stories is tied to reinforcing the
Right.
political layer in mythological stories. And
So,
so study how they did that and tease that into your story.
right. So somebody in the peanut gallery said brainwash the society. And sort of yes, but these are all things that the society at the time wants, agrees with.
Yeah, so
You know,
it's both, right? It's a feedback loop.
right, exactly. So it's not necessarily like, oh,
Yeah.
I'm going to brainwash you to do this thing because you don't want to do it, but I do want you to do it. It's more of a society is just like you said, a feedback loop. It's this is what we
Yeah.
want, so we're going to enforce it, which is going to make it to where we want it more, which is going to we're going to reinforce it, which is going to make us want it more, which is we're going to want to reinforce it more, and it just
Mm.
kind of does that until something comes along, usually in the next generation,
Yeah.
that looks back on that and goes, yeah, but I don't agree with that.
I don't actually like that. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's why society usually changes fairly slowly
Yeah.
because it does take growth over more than just one person's lifetime. Not that
Yeah.
one person, can't change. I have changed dozen times in my life,
One person can change, but society
but that
as a
doesn't change
whole
society. Right.
does not. Yeah.
Right.
Society as a whole is a slow process
Right.
because it's yeah.
All right. Let's bring this home because we have one last layer that we want to talk about, which is the spiritual layer. So
Yes.
to me, this is the layer that transcends plot, character, and really even theme. It kind of asks the question of like, what does the story touch in us that feels eternal? What unseen forces move beneath the surface of our narrative that are greater than ourselves? Kind of that thing. What do you got?
Yes. So even for me as like an atheist, this to me is the kind of transcendent level. And you know, I do believe in a certain amount of transcendence, um, of consciousness, as it were, like things that touch us. Like, why do I read about a new scientific thing about how the cosmos was created and the effect of stars and nebulas, and it just like it fills me with wonder. You know, I learned the other day about a beetle that lives in the Namib Desert. It only lives in the Namib Desert, right? And it's got little runnels on its body, in its carapace. And the Namib Desert is extremely dry, drier than Las Vegas, drier than anywhere you've ever been, right? It's cork dry. And there's only mist water. Okay, in the very early mornings, the mist comes off the ocean. And this beetle's evolved these little runnels. The water catches in the runnels and runs down into its mouth. And I was just like, that is so freaking awesome. It was just, it filled me with wonder to just read that, to just understand that there is this beetle that has evolved to do this. Um,
You say that about Las Vegas. One of the weirdest things that I've experienced
yeah.
is my wife really wanted to do a raised garden. She wanted to grow some vegetables, some herbs, some different things. And while Vegas isn't the place to grow anything naturally, um, if you water, we're one of the best places to grow because you got almost year round that you can grow crops because we have so little cold here. And I was like, this is gonna be great because there's just no bugs here. Yeah. Until we opened a 3 foot by 6 foot plot of fertile land with plants in it and water, we are now constantly fighting bugs. Like I don't even know where they're coming from, but like they're like, oh look, there's a spot we can survive. And we have ant colonies that we've been fighting. We have like in this one little 6 foot area. Where'd you guys come from? And just all sorts of different white
Mm,
flies that I didn't even know we had. And just everything. Our little 6 foot plot of land is
Yeah.
just inundated with bugs that I didn't even know
Insects.
existed here.
Yeah.
But
And it's just like it is marvelous to me, and that kind of connectedness to me is the spiritual layer. Now, the spiritual layer could, of course, connect to a god or gods or whatever cosmological entities you want to involve. That can be a part of your story.
I like to
But
I like to think about it like this. It can be religious, but it doesn't have to be. But
yeah,
it's always existential.
yes. Yeah. It's
Whether it's
always your
religious or not is
existential.
beside the point.
Yeah. It is your existential layer.
This is where I want to explore faith or fate or
Mm,
redemption or transcendence or ancestral memory or the void itself,
yeah.
that there is nothing. Um, that's kind of the things that I'm thinking of. The example
Yeah.
that I wrote down, um, like what is, because some people are like, well, what's the difference between the spiritual layer and the thematic layer? And for me, like the theme might be of the story is forgiveness versus revenge. So we're telling a story that the character could have full revenge, but it's going to destroy them unless they learn forgiveness. It's kind of the story that I'm writing right now that I was hired to write for this movie. It's based, that's where it ends. But the spiritual layer of that might ask something like, is there even such a thing as grace in a broken world? Like, does grace actually even exist? And so that's not a thematic layer. That's more of a spiritual layer, something bigger than ourselves. So that's what I think, that's what at least I mean when I talk about the spiritual layer.
Yeah, that is what I mean. Like the world outside of us, the connectedness with a larger reality. And it's kind of the heart, the inner seedling um, of your story.
Yeah. So just to kind of wrap this up, we went through a bunch of different layers. There, you don't have to use all of them. I think you have to at least touch on every one of them, or there will be an aspect of the story that feels hollow.
Mm,
But any of these layers can be the story. Like they could
yes.
be the focus of the story that you're trying to tell. So it really depends
Except
on
the plot layer. The plot can never be the
true,
focus.
true, true, true. Yes, that top layer is literally just the superficial.
Yeah.
That's why I call the physical layer the UPS truck.
Yeah.
It's delivering the package. It's not the package.
Now
It's
it needs to
delivering it.
be a good-looking truck and
Oh,
it
yeah.
needs to come
With a
with bells and whistles and awesomeness.
and a hunky driver with a
Yeah.
6 pack and like the perfect jaw and oh yeah,
Yeah.
100%. Like we want the UPS truck and driver to just
Mhm.
be exactly what we're looking for. But
Yes.
it's still just delivering the package. It isn't
Yes.
the package. Um, so that's the way I like to kind of think about it. And that's the reason why I call it the UPS truck. Um, because it has to work. I mean, if it has a flat tire, it's not getting there. If it's all rusted out and the engine doesn't work, or it's
It's not working. Yeah.
yeah, it's not going to work. So that's you are correct. I mean, that's not the
Yeah.
story, and that's where we started there. But everything else, I feel like the next 5 layers, you have to at least have in some form or fashion, even if they're like I do with my societal level.
Yeah.
It's more of a backdrop to the story. So, like the novel that I'm writing right now, the farm boy comes from an area that has arranged marriages,
Mm.
and he doesn't like that, and he really would like to avoid an arranged marriage, but he has no say in it. However, he never gets married. Like it's not the
Yeah.
story that it has nothing to do with the story. He's not even in danger of getting married. It's just one of those things where it affects him in the beginning because he's like, this is not what I want for my life. Um, so it's more of a backdrop. But if
So
I
he is in conflict with his society.
right, but it isn't a part of the story, so it never affects the character arc or any of these other things that we're talking
Yeah.
about. Now, if I wanted to go down and tell a story about whatever I wanted to do with arranged marriages, then it'd be the same society. The
Mm,
story would just focus on that, and the character's arc would revolve around that, as opposed to it's just a backdrop. It's just
mm.
something there that makes it feel real, makes the society feel real, but it really has no impact on the plot. It has no impact on the character arc or anything like that. So that's what I
That,
mean by, even if you have it as a superficial level, it still makes the story feel more real, and
yes,
the world and everything else.
yes, exactly. You can have the story's focus can be on any layer, but
Mm-hmm.
there must be something in each layer, otherwise you feel hollow.
Yeah.
I think that is a good place to end this episode.
Yep.
We will see you soon for another one.
Bye.